And I was also recording the songs myself. So I would record a vocal and then be like, Will, how was that? Like, that was pretty good, Will. Thanks, Will. Like, it was.
After 5 years, you will release your second solo album called Generations, which you recorded in your basement in Brooklyn. Why did you choose to create this new record in your home and not in a studio?
I wanted to start in my home because I had the space in the basement and I knew that I could record some punk rock songs there and they would sound perfect and it would be like the right place for it. But we got it all set up and I had my friend Corey Ritchie, who's an engineer, come over and mic the drums. He came over in the afternoon, we just got a drum sound. And then I had my band over and we played and we're like, we're gonna do a week. We're gonna play a couple shows and then we're gonna go to my basement, we're gonna record for a week and we're gonna see what's working and where do we need to go to like find a nicer space and where do we need to go to find a piano that blooms more. And we recorded for a week and we got most of the record recorded. I mean, the beds. We had like takes or the songs existed. And it was like, oh, maybe this is the place. Maybe we're just going to make this here because it feels right. Because I was like, oh, we'll go to a studio and we'll do the grand songs. But it just felt right. So we kept it going.
Okay, you mentioned that Generations is like a maiden and funny and a bit epic novel where you question your place in American history and also your place as a musician, parent, and a person. Could you tell us how this internal and musical search began?
Yeah, I mean, my mom's a musician and her parents are musicians and their parents were musicians. I mean, it started at the end of the 1800s with my great-grandfather who was the last son of a pioneer family, like a Mormon pioneer family in Utah, and he decided he would be a musician. And that decision obviously has influenced where I am. And my dad's family has been in New England since the 1600s, and they're still there. They've been on like 3 different islands in Maine for the last 300 years. And so these decisions that were made in the 16 and 17 and 1800s are still echoing today in my personal life, while at the same time we're seeing how the decisions that we made, at least in America in the 16 and 17 and 1800s, are still echoing today and deciding. It's like very, very influential on how long people live. Like, do people catch the coronavirus? It's very much informed by what happened 300 years ago, which is, to me, means that we kind of have to dig in and we have to both learn where we come from and also where our world comes from.
Talking about this family inherence, basically, was that something you discovered in recent years, or how and when you discovered that you have a family full of musicians?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a part of my life growing up always. I mean, my grandpa had a big band in the 40s and my grandma was in a singing group with her sisters. They were jazz vocalists. And yeah, we would listen to their records. They were still touring when they were 80 years old. They would still be playing shows. And they would talk about their parents and they would talk about where they were from. And so it was just always present. And same like where my dad lives, we used to stay in the house from 200 years ago that his great-great-grandfather built, and his family was still living there, and we would stay there and we would go swim in the ocean.
Speaking of that song, the video you released was recorded by yourself and it captures some experience during the quarantine. But also you mentioned the situation that has been going in the United States for a few months with the Black Lives Matter movement. Why do you decide to approach these topics in this way, and how do you think you transmit them through this specific song?
I mean, the song is about nostalgia, and it's a romantic song, but it's about the past and how did we get to where we are today, which we're all wondering now in a very different context about the world. And also I went to put together the song. I was like, oh, I've got all this footage of us making the record. And as I was putting it together, it was so emotional just looking at these things from 6 months ago. And I don't want to go back in time 6 months ago, because 6 months ago was still kind of a bad time. But it made me nostalgic for the future. And it made me, and just all my friends and everyone where I live with in Brooklyn had the protests on their mind and had the coronavirus on their mind and had the election on their mind. And it felt, I couldn't start speaking into the world without at least acknowledging it, without being like, this is the world that this music is coming into. Because otherwise it felt to pretend that it's just playing music in the basement, but it's also true. Like, playing music in the basement is beautiful and it is part of it, but there's also other things happening.
We all know that you have a master's degree in public policy that you studied at Harvard. Could you tell us what was the reason you decided to study that, and how, if you consider in that way, has that contributed or changed your career as a musician?
Yeah, so I've had a relationship with this group, Partners in Health, for a long time. Arcade Fire's been working with them for more than 10 years. They started by providing healthcare in rural Haiti, but they work all over the world. They're very much systems focused. They don't go in and give people injections and leave. They go and they build a healthcare system. And they are very much, they make it very clear that people live shorter lives because of decisions that rich people make, essentially. Like, if rich people gave more money and more medicine to people would live longer. Like, people are literally dying for stupid reasons. So I went to school to figure out how I could assist them in making less people die for stupid reasons. But when I was there, it was the US election. It was 2016. So it was also a crazy time to be at a school learning about policy and the government and what's going on.
Talking about now this new album, you mentioned recently that you made the 10 songs on this new album before the quarantine. And what was the creative process that you followed on this second musical work? How would you encompass the concept of the entire album?
Most of the songs they were written in the last 5 years. The oldest one is probably Surrender, written in 2015. But I always try to just live life and see what emerges from it. And it's been a weird 3 or 4 years. And there's been a lot of strife and just a lot of trying to figure out what do we do? There's a song on the record that's I don't know what to do, essentially. That's the song. I don't know what to do. which I feel like I felt that emotion a lot in the last 5 years. I don't know what to do. But you also feel a passion about it, and you also want to run away. It's I just would, if you told me that I could just run away, maybe I would do it, but I can't. I have to, what do I do? Let's figure it out.
In a more personal way, people who play in well-known bands always deal with the fact that others will compare their personal work with what they have done in a musical group. How have you learned to deal with being a musician beyond Arcade Fire?
It was initially quite strange to put out music not with Arcade Fire, because that was the only band I'd ever been in. I mean, I was in a covers band in college, it was the second band I was ever in. Okay. But yeah, it's a different sort of collaboration. I mean, luckily, the people that like Arcade Fire are really warm and generous of spirit. I think that's probably true of most people who like music. They're very warm. So it feels great because I'm not fighting with them. And it's not, I think it'd be different if I was quitting Arcade Fire and starting my own thing, but it's an outgrowth. it's of a piece. It's a coherent vision. This is just a different aspect of it.
What do you like the most and least about working alone and not in a band?
It's both great and terrifying to have all the responsibility on your shoulders to make all the final decisions. Whereas in a band, it's all collaborative. But here, I mean, this was with my bands that I tour with, but it was still all the decisions were ultimately like, is this it? Yes or no? And I'd have to say yes or no. And I was also recording the songs myself. So I would record a vocal and then be like, Will, how was that? Like, that was pretty good, Will. Thanks, Will. Like it gets in your head a little bit, but it's a different aspect. It's like, it's working a different muscle group. If you do it too much, it's crazy, but if it's in balance, then it's great.
I think that's all.
All right.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
I hope to see you soon.
Thanks so much. I hope to see you soon.
Yeah.